Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon English study group, and we're studying Volume 5 of our book series. We're actually starting this book. It's a new book for us. Of course, it's been part of the book series for a long time, but it's a new book for this particular iteration of the Pali Canon and English study group. The way that we do this study group is I invite students from Zoom to be able to read a chapter from our book. And then after someone reads a chapter, I'm going to share some teachings on that. Then I'll open up to whatever questions you have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can ask questions by putting that into the comment section, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand, unmute your microphone, and ask any and all questions that you like. This book, Volume 5, Stream Enter, the first stage of enlightenment. This is a collection of teachings that are going to help you to be able to get to that first stage of enlightenment. It wouldn't be only this book. It's all the books that are leading up to this. And there's even some stuff in the latter books that'll help you to get to the first stage of enlightenment. But this is a real collection of teachings that are going to help you to get to that first stage of enlightenment. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. And if you'd like to read in Zoom, just let me know by electronically raising your hand, and then I'll be able to call on you. And then, as I mentioned, as you guys have questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom by putting that in the comment section, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any and all questions you like that way. Okay, it looks like Vibhav has his hand up. Let's see. There we go. All right, go ahead, Vibhav.
Chapter 1, The Mirror of the Stream Enterer. Ananda, I teach you a teachings exposition called the Mirror of the Teachings, equipped with which a noble disciple, if he aspires, could by himself declare of himself, I am one finished with hell, finished with animal realm, finished with the realm of afflicted spirits, finished with the plane of misery, the bad destinations, the netherworld. I am a stream enterer, no longer bound to the netherworld, fixed in destination, with enlightenment as my destination. And what Ananda is a teaching exposition, the mirror of the teachings, equipped with which a noble disciple, if he aspires, could by himself declare thus of himself. Here, Ananda, a noble disciple possesses confirmed confidence in the Buddha thus. The perfectly enlightened one is an Arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true wisdom and conduct, fortunate, knower of the worlds, unsurpassed leader of the persons to be tamed, teacher of heavenly beings and humans, the enlightened one, the fortunate one. He possesses confirmed confidence in the teachings. Thus, the teachings are well expounded by the perfectly enlightened one, directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise. He possesses confirmed confidence in the community. Thus, the community of the perfectly enlightened one's disciples is practicing the wholesome way, practicing the straight way, practicing the true way, practicing the proper way. That is, the 4 pairs of persons, the 8 types of individuals. This community of the perfectly enlightened one's disciples is worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of respectful salutation, the unsurpassed field of merit for the world. He possesses the virtues dear to the noble ones, unbroken, untorn, unblemished, liberated, praised by the wise, not misunderstood, and leading to concentration. This Ananda is those teachings exposition, the mirror of the teachings, equipped with which a noble disciple, he aspires, could by himself declare of himself. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vibhav. So whenever you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, it's important that you look at them in their totality, that you don't look at just kind of isolated discourses. Because if somebody read this discourse and they were like, oh, this is all you need in order to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment, they would actually not be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. Because what the Buddha does is he will have different teachings, and he'll kind of take a different slant at each part of the teaching. So in terms of getting to the first stage of enlightenment, there's a whole collection of teachings that you would need to learn and understand to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. It's not only this particular discourse, but these are 4 qualities that a stream enter or someone in the first stage of enlightenment will actually have. That the Buddha here is talking about these 4 criteria, but these aren't the only 4 criteria. Now, we refer to the first stage of enlightenment as a stream enterer because when you enter into the first stage of enlightenment, you've entered the stream. Just like the log that enters the stream, that it's going to eventually get to the ocean, the same thing is true about someone who's gotten to the first stage of enlightenment, that once they get to the first stage of enlightenment, they're going to eventually get to enlightenment. It's only a matter of time, either in this life or some future life, they're going to be able to get to the fourth stage of enlightenment where the mind is actually enlightened. It would be a maximum of 7 rebirths. So there's multiple things that determine whether someone is actually in the first stage of enlightenment or not. Primarily, it's going to be the first 3 fetters have been eliminated from the mind, which is personal existence view, doubts, and wrong behavior and observances. But in addition to that, you're going to learn in this book multiple things that a stream enterer, someone who's gotten to that first stage of enlightenment, will be practicing, and you'll be able to observe from this individual. That's why this is referred to as the mirror of the stream enterer, is that if you see a stream enterer, this is the mirror, this is the reflection, this is what you're going to actually see. So the Buddha sets this up by saying, hey, I'm going to teach you what the first stage of enlightenment is in terms of certain qualities that this individual will be exhibiting. It's a certain mirror, it's a certain reflection that you will see coming from this person. And for someone who's gotten to the first stage of enlightenment, you can see that the Buddha here is saying that this individual is no longer going to be reborn into the lower realms, the realm of hell, the animal realm, and the realm of afflicted spirits. He refers to this as the plane of misery or the bad destinations or the netherworld, that once you get to that first stage of enlightenment, you've become a better and better human by that point. And you will be able to tell that your mind is in that first stage of enlightenment. But by the time you've gotten there, if you actually die in that stage of enlightenment, you will come back into the human world because you've evolved beyond the animalistic instincts that would have you reborn into hell, the animal world, or the realm of afflicted spirits, which are like ghosts. So those realms, beings have extensive amounts of craving. And by the time you've gotten to the first stage of enlightenment, you've diminished your craving to a certain degree. So by the time you get to this first stage of enlightenment, if you die, you're not going to be reborn into the lower realms. And as I was sharing, that once you're in this first stage of enlightenment, you will get to enlightenment. It's only a matter of time. You can see that here where the Buddha says you're no longer bound to the netherworld, meaning you're no longer going to be reborn there. You're fixed in destination with enlightenment as your destination, because that's where you're going to ultimately be able to get to, either in that life where you've gotten to the first stage of enlightenment or some future life. So the Buddha is talking to Ananda here, and as you guys probably remember from previous classes, this is a close student of the Buddha. We think maybe his brother-in-law or his cousin, someone who was with the Buddha for an extensive amount of time, from the beginning of his teaching career all the way to the end when he actually dies. And this individual is accredited for having remembered the teachings very closely. There were 500 enlightened beings that came together and started documenting the teachings. But Ananda is really credited for having had the best memory, because I imagine he heard the discourses directly from the Buddha multiple times, being with him for so long. So here he's teaching Ananda and helping him to understand 3 qualities that an individual in the first stage of enlightenment is going to have. The first one is they're going to have confirmed confidence in the Buddha. Because by the time you get into the first stage of enlightenment, you will have seen significant progress to the condition of your mind in your life. Whatever discontentedness you used to once experience when you were off the path to enlightenment, it's just a mere fraction by the time you get to this particular stage of enlightenment. You've diminished your discontentedness significantly. So you'll have confidence in this individual, the Buddha. You will have no doubt that his teachings are actually working. You will have no doubt that this person actually lived, because you've independently verified so many of his teachings in order to be able to get to that first stage of enlightenment. So you'll have confirmed confidence, meaning that if somebody said to you, hey, what's going on with this guy, the Buddha? Did he really exist? You would know, like, oh yeah, he existed, because you know that your mind is experiencing improved qualities. So that's one of the first qualities that an individual will have, is they'll have this confirmed confidence in him as a perfectly enlightened one, as an arahant, and someone who was definitely in existence and was a Buddha. Then there'll be this confirmed confidence in the teachings, because you would have learned and independently verified and practiced a certain amount of the teachings to be able to get to that point where you're in the first stage of enlightenment. These teachings that you're learning, as the Buddha shares, these teachings are directly visible, immediate, meaning they can immediately be applied and you can start seeing benefits. They're inviting one to come and see. This is where the Buddha says, come and see my teachings, come examine them. He doesn't say just believe them. He will typically say, come examine the teachings, because if you examine them close enough, he knows that it led to his enlightenment, so it'll lead to your enlightenment too. So he invites people to come and see his teachings. They're applicable, meaning they apply to day-to-day life and they help you to be able to make wiser decisions. And then as you're practicing them, they're personally experienced by those people who are wise and understand his teachings. They're personally experienced that you can see the improvement to your mind in your life. Then there's this confirmed confidence in the community. The community is the greater, larger group of people that you're part of. So while we come together here, anywhere from 6 to 15 to 20 people, for per class, there's thousands and thousands of people that are learning as part of this community. And after this live class, there'll be hundreds and if not thousands of people listening to this podcast and this YouTube video. And over the course of many years, it could be thousands or tens of thousands of people that are actually going to participate and be able to learn these teachings. So you'll learn directly from your teacher, but you're going to also learn from the community. You'll see people being polite, kind, friendly, and respectful. You'll see people practicing generosity and loving kindness and compassion. And you'll learn from those people as well, not just your teacher, but from those people as well. And during the lifetime of the Buddha, we might think that he was the only game in town and he was the only one teaching. Because if you lived during the lifetime of a Buddha, you'd probably be interested in learning directly from a Buddha, right? Why not? But not everybody knows who a Buddha is, because a Buddha doesn't go around declaring that they're an actual Buddha. So during his lifetime, there were multiple people who were teaching and there were multiple communities that were learning from those teachers. But the Buddha knew that it was his community that was practicing the wholesome way. That's what he says here, that the community is practicing the wholesome way, the straight way, the true way, the proper way. Because other people were practicing what they thought would lead to enlightenment, but the Buddha knew that it wasn't those teachings that led to enlightenment. So it's his community that's practicing this wholesome way, this straight way, the true way to enlightenment and the proper way. And he talks about these 4 pairs of persons and the 8 types of individuals that are part of this community that he's created. What he's talking about here is anybody who's in one of the 4 stages of enlightenment, or someone who's practicing to get into one of the 4 stages of enlightenment. Those are the 8 types of individuals in the 4 pairs. So if somebody's not in the first stage of enlightenment, but they're practicing to get into the first stage of enlightenment, that's an individual. Then someone who's in the first stage of enlightenment, that's an individual. Someone who's in the first stage of enlightenment practicing to be able to get into the second stage, that's another individual, right? So there's these pairs, the person who's practicing for the realization of the first stage of enlightenment and someone who's in the first stage, someone who's practicing for the second stage and is in the second stage. Then there's another pair of persons who's practicing for the third stage and someone who's in the third stage. And then someone who's practicing for the fourth stage and someone who's in the fourth stage. So these are the 8 types of persons and the 4 pairs of persons. So these individuals are practicing the teachings very closely. And the Buddha reminds people that it would be those individuals who are worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of reverential salutation. Because if you can imagine during the lifetime of a Buddha, there's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people that are learning and practicing from that person by the time they get to death. And out of that group of people, there's only a certain core group of people that are practicing really closely. There'll be countless people who get to enlightenment during a Buddha's lifetime, but there'll also be people on the fringes who aren't really practicing the teachings very closely. So the Buddha was encouraging people to learn from those who are practicing the teachings very closely. And that's the 4 pairs of persons and the 8 types of individuals that the Buddha was encouraging people to learn from. So by the time you get to this first stage of enlightenment, you will know how crucial and how important it is to have a community of people to be able to learn from, so that you can learn from your teacher, but you can learn from them too. And that's why there's going to be confirmed confidence in the community, because you're going to be able to see that people are practicing the teachings well within a community that's being cultivated to be able to make their way to enlightenment. Then there's this fourth criteria, which is virtues dear to the noble one. What the Buddha is referring to here is moral conduct, because by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you will have shed a lot of the unwholesome moral conduct that you were practicing as part of being unenlightened and off the path to enlightenment. So as you're learning and growing and developing and improving your moral conduct, this is going to help you to improve the condition of your mind and your relationships. That's why the Buddha says here that it's leading to concentration. Because as long as you're using wrong speech, wrong action, and wrong livelihood, and you're practicing those, your mind's going to be cluttered and confused when you're in any one given situation. But when you're practicing the true way, the upright way, the straight way, practicing the proper way, you'll be able to see that as you're learning these teachings, you're practicing the wisdom of the moral conduct, that it's going to improve the condition of your mind. Oftentimes people are spending a lot of time on meditation. Well, meditation is important, but you've got to clean up your moral conduct. If you're not working on your moral conduct, your mind's going to be very scattered, and it's also going to be very difficult for you to experience improved results in your day-to-day life through your relationships, whether they're personal or professional. So you're going to need to clean up your moral conduct. And by the time you've gotten to the first stage of enlightenment, you will have cleaned it up to a certain degree that this is why the Buddha is saying that they possess virtues dear to the noble ones, and that this is praised by the wise. And you're not misunderstanding that these teachings are actually true and leading to improved results. And it leads to this concentration. So this is the mirror, or this is the reflection that you're going to see with someone who's in the first stage of enlightenment. But keep in mind that these aren't the only things that a person who needs to get to the first stage of enlightenment is going to need to be practicing and understand to be able to practice. This is just one aspect of what the Buddha is actually talking about. And you'll see this very commonly where he talks about these four things. The first three, confirmed confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, and the community, this is referred to as the triple gem or the triple jewel, because you need these three things in order to be able to get to enlightenment. You're going to need to have confidence in the Buddha, access to his teachings, and you're going to need to be part of a community. If you just have one or two of these things, you wouldn't actually be able to get to enlightenment. So if you have confidence in the Buddha, but you don't have access to his teachings and you're not part of a community, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. Or if you just had access to his teachings, but you don't have confidence in him and you're not part of a community, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. Or if you were part of a community, but you didn't have confidence in the Buddha and you didn't have access to his teachings, you wouldn't actually be able to get to enlightenment. So you're going to need all three of these things. And when you first come to the path, you're most likely not going to have these three things, or these four things, or these three, the triple gem. You're not going to have those, and you're not going to have the virtuous behavior. This is something that you work towards. So as you enter into a community and you're learning and practicing and developing with the true teachings, and you see the improvement to the mind, that's where your confidence comes in more and more, that you start eliminating doubt. And eventually, by the time you get to that first stage of enlightenment, you would have eliminated personal existence view, doubt about the teachings and the ability of them to attain enlightenment, as well as doubt in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to get to enlightenment. And you would have eliminated the wrong behavior and observances. Those are the three fetters. But here, these are four things that help you to be able to see what a person who's in the first stage of enlightenment is actually practicing. They have confirmed confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, and the community, and they're practicing good, wholesome moral conduct. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, teacher. I have just a couple. On page 24 of your explanations, it goes through the different I'll call it criteria for the stages of enlightenment. So under a once returner, it says returns to the human realm only one time. So I'm assuming that would be a once returner can return to the human or the heavenly realm. Is that correct?
A once returner would only come back to the human realm. If you ended up dying in the stage of enlightenment as the second stage, you would die in that stage of enlightenment. You would come back into the human world, and then you would get to enlightenment in that existence.
Okay. And then with the non-returner, if you do not return to the human realm, does that mean you also would not go to a heavenly realm?
As a non-returner, you're not coming back to the human realm, but instead you're being reborn into the heavenly realm, and you're getting to enlightenment there in that existence. Because the heavenly realm is not permanent, and that's not the ideal place. So you're still in the cycle of rebirth at that point. Okay.
And then another question on page 25, near the bottom, there is no finish line to the attainment of enlightenment. Once the mind reaches the fourth stage, it can continue to ascend to higher degrees. How can you have a higher degree of enlightenment?
You'll have increased concentration, and you'll cultivate wisdom about other things in the world, that it's not just the path to enlightenment. By the time you get to enlightenment, you have eliminated all the causes and conditions that are producing discontentedness, but there's still more room to grow in terms of the cultivation of wisdom and increased levels of concentration. So someone who's gotten to enlightenment, say 20 years ago, versus someone who just got to enlightenment, like within the last couple of weeks, for example, if we were able to trace it to that level, these individuals are both enlightened. We would consider them both to be enlightened, but the level of wisdom that this individual has that got to enlightenment 20 years ago, it's going to be a much higher degree of wisdom, and their concentration is going to be a lot more focused and a higher degree of concentration. But it's not really something that you measure in terms of your growth and development, because it's just continuing to develop the mind from the point that it's completely purified.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, let me check if we have any questions anywhere else. Right, I don't see any questions anywhere else. So let's go to the next chapter, which is chapter 2. But before we do, let me just share something about this here, since we were talking about it in class. This is the 4 stages of enlightenment. And I teach this in the discourses where I share in classes about what is enlightenment. And if you've taken the foundational classes, then you've learned this from me, and you've seen it in the book in volume 1, chapter 3 in the book series. It's important to keep in mind that this is a personal growth plan. This is to help you grow and develop on the path. This isn't something to measure and compare yourself against other people. That's not what the Buddha is sharing here. He's essentially sharing with you a plan for you to learn and grow and develop, because there's a certain sequence to eliminating these fetters. You can work on the higher fetters at any time that you like, but in terms of getting to enlightenment, there is kind of a sequence that needs to happen in order to eliminate these fetters. And it's not that you couldn't work on conceit, for example, until you've eliminated the other fetters. It's just that you wouldn't be able to eliminate conceit until you've eliminated personal existence view, for example. So you wouldn't be able to eliminate sensual desire until you've improved your wrong behavior and observances, for example. So keep in mind that when you're seeing this particular plan that the Buddha is sharing with you about your development on the path in the 4 stages, this is something for you to be able to understand for your own personal growth. This might be something you talk to your teacher about or something like that, but it's not something that you go around bragging about or being boastful about. You don't put on your Facebook page like, I'm a stream mentor. Look at me, everyone. Aren't I really great? Or you're not going to call mom and be like, hey, mom, guess what? Aren't you so proud of me? I'm a stream mentor, right? This is more so just for you to be able to plot your steps on the path, giving you some light structure of how to move forward with the development of your mind. So that's what the 4 stages of enlightenment are for. So as you guys can see, there's quite a bit of content here that would be helpful for you if you aren't already reading before or after class, to be able to read these books before or after class, because I can't teach everything as part of the class. So here, this is chapter 2, who is a stream enterer. This one's very similar to the previous discourse. So I don't know that we necessarily need to read this. If you've been studying this on your own at home, then you've probably already read this, and you can see what the Buddha is teaching here is that these are these four things that a stream enterer has, that they're no longer bound to the netherworld, to the lower destinations, that they have confirmed confidence in the Buddha, they have confirmed confidence in the teachings, they have confirmed confidence in the community, and they have these virtues that are dear to the noble ones. This is the virtuous moral conduct. So this is very similar to the previous discourse. So I've got a lot of similar content here for people to be able to read as part of learning this particular chapter. Now this one here, this one is also very similar as well. You're going to see a whole lot of chapters here that are similar. It's got a little bit of a difference in the opening and the closing, so I guess we'll go ahead and read this, but the middle is very similar to what we've seen in the last two discourses. So is there someone here that would like to read this one? Okay, Samantha, go ahead, ma'am.
Who is a stream enterer? Second discourse. Don't be afraid, Mahanama. Don't be afraid, Mahanama. Your death will not be a bad one. Your demise will not be a bad one. A noble disciple who possesses four things slants, slopes, and inclines towards Nibbana. What for? Here, Mahanama. A noble disciple possesses confirmed confidence in the Buddha thus. The perfectly enlightened one is an arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true wisdom and conduct, fortunate knower of the worlds, unsurpassed leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of heavenly beings and humans, the enlightened one, the fortunate one. He possesses confirmed confidence in the teachings thus. The teachings are well expounded by the perfectly enlightened one, directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise. He possesses confirmed confidence in the community thus. The community of the perfectly enlightened one's disciples is practicing the wholesome way, practicing the straight way, practicing the true way, practicing the proper way. That is, the four pairs of persons, the 8 types of individuals. This community of the perfectly enlightened one's disciples is worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of respectful salutation, the unsurpassed field of merit for the world. He possesses the virtues dear to the noble ones, unbroken, untorn, unblemished, unblotched, liberating, praised by the wise, not misunderstood, and leading to concentration. Suppose, Mahanama, a tree was slanting, sloping, and inclining towards the east. If it was cut down at its foot, in what direction would it fall? In whatever direction it was slanting, sloping, and inclining, Venerable Sir. So too, Mahanama, a noble disciple who possesses these four things, slants, slopes, and inclines towards Nibbana.
All right. Thank you, Samantha. So here, this is like a better way for you to think about these four qualities, because like I mentioned, if you look at some of those discourses and you looked at them in isolation, you might think that those are the only four things that you need in order to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. But this particular discourse helps you to be able to see more clearly what it is that the Buddha was teaching, that he's helping you to see these different angles. So what he's sharing here is these four qualities are going to slant, slope, and incline towards enlightenment, right? And it's one of the things that you're going to learn and practice and develop as part of your journey to the first stage of enlightenment. But the first stage of enlightenment is helping you to prepare for the fourth stage, where the mind is actually enlightened. One of the ways that I think about the first stage of enlightenment is I think about it like base camp at Mount Everest. That if you're going to go to base camp in Mount Everest, you're not going to just stumble into base camp at Mount Everest. You're not ever going to see me at Mount Everest, right? Like I'm not going to be stumbling into base camp at Mount Everest. For anybody who's at base camp at Mount Everest, they've got a lot of intention, a lot of thought. They've done a lot of preparation to be able to get to the point where they're potentially going to get to the summit of this mountain. They've probably been on other hikes that are somewhat similar. They've used different gear, different equipment. They've done lots of different trekking in order to be able to get to the point where they're now at base camp at Mount Everest, potentially being able to get to the summit. They're not at the summit yet, but they've got all the supplies, they've got all the equipment, they've got the knowledge and the wisdom that they need to be able to get to the summit. Not everybody gets to the summit who's at base camp, but they're prepared and ready to be able to get to the summit. So that's essentially what it's like to be in this first stage of enlightenment, is that you've prepped and you've got all the tools that you need. There's still learning and growth and development that you need. You still need guidance from a teacher. That's why at base camp, they still have guides to be able to take them up to the actual summit of Mount Everest. But they have everything they need in terms of equipment, and they've practiced and they've done things that they've needed in order to get there. And they've gotten there with a lot of intention. They haven't stumbled into base camp at Mount Everest. So the same thing is true here with the first stage of enlightenment. You're not going to just stumble into the first stage of enlightenment. There's been a lot of intentional work of reading and verifying the teachings and attending classes and meditating and interacting with a teacher and getting guidance and all these other things that you would need in order to be able to kind of put your arms around what it takes to be able to get to this first stage of enlightenment. And having done so, you will have everything that you need to then be able to get to enlightenment. But not everybody who's in the first stage of enlightenment is actually going to get to enlightenment itself in that particular life. They're going to need to potentially be reborn to come back and then do this again. And some of you guys might have actually been stream mentors in a past life. You don't know necessarily right now, but there's the potential. And it doesn't really matter if that's the case or not, but instead just focus on what you're doing today in order to be able to move your mind forward to the next step. So it's these four things that the Buddha is talking about again, that slant, slope, and incline towards enlightenment, towards this first stage of enlightenment, and thus enlightenment itself. This particular student must have had some fear or something like that, and the Buddha was saying, hey, don't be afraid, your death's not going to be a bad one. One of the things that a Buddha has the ability to do is to be able to see the future. And he might have said this in order to kind of calm this person's mind, if their mind was kind of, shaken up by the potential of maybe dying. So this individual was being guided by the Buddha, and he thought it was wise to be able to let this person know to not be afraid that his death wouldn't be a bad one. And then he talks about these four qualities that an individual is going to have that needs to be able to make their way to the first stage of enlightenment and enlightenment. It's the same four qualities that we talked about previously. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Looks like Samantha. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. If one were to have been a stream enterer, and then in your next existence, you, like now for me, for example, I find that some of the fetters and teachings are very easy to verify and I would say kind of move beyond. And then there are other ones that I'm stumbling on. And so I'm wondering if I was a stream enterer and already on the path in a previous existence, would I be likely to be stumbling where I had stumbled before?
Yeah, if you didn't cultivate certain wisdom in the past, you wouldn't have that wisdom available to you now. And even if there were certain wisdom that you cultivated in the past, from one life to the next, it could kind of have been diminished. It's not like you get to the first stage of enlightenment in, say, your previous life, and then you're born and you start exactly where you left off. Instead, you're still starting out as an infant, and you need to grow and develop. You need to learn how to walk and talk and all the things that we do as we become adults and stuff like that. But the wisdom would come more easily to you. That sometimes when people approach the path to enlightenment, everything just seems so difficult and so much of a struggle. And in this case, they most likely hadn't learned and practiced these teachings in the past. But if you're finding some things to be like really easy and really straightforward, there's the potential that you could have learned and practiced in the past. But then those things that you struggled with in the past, since you never cultivated the wisdom of those things, you're going to have challenges with them in this life too. And now cultivating the wisdom about them in this life, it'll make it easier for you to be able to either get to enlightenment, or if you fall short for any reason in your next life, you'll be able to know those things more readily in your next life, potentially.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm just going to check and see if we have any questions on Facebook or YouTube. And I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter. This is chapter 4. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, looks like Samantha again. Go ahead, ma'am.
A stream enterer possesses the noble eightfold path. Sariputta, this is said. A stream enterer, a stream enterer. What now, Sariputta, is a stream enterer? One who possesses this noble eightfold path, Venerable Sir, is called a stream enterer. This venerable one of such a name and clan. Good, Sariputta. One who possesses this noble eightfold path is a stream enterer. This venerable one of such a name and clan. Okay,
thank you, Samantha. So again, if you just came across this discourse and that's all you saw, you might actually think, okay, if I just learn and practice the Eightfold Path, I'll be a stream enterer. And this would actually be not true. That yes, a person who is in the first stage of enlightenment, they will have learned and practiced the Eightfold Path to perfection, and they would be perfecting that more and more as they go in order to be able to get to enlightenment. But to the point of the first stage of enlightenment, they will be practicing it to that level of perfection, right? But there's other things too. So it's important not to look at the teachings of the Buddha in isolation and see them in the totality. So as you guys have always heard from me all the way throughout all the programs that I share, is I say, in order to get to the jhanas and the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to need to really refine your understanding of the Eightfold Path, and you're going to need to practice it very closely. And I encourage people to commit the Eightfold Path to their memory. So you can see that here in the words of the Buddha for yourself, that he's saying it himself, right? He's asking this question to Sariputta. And when the Buddha was asked during his lifetime who were his main students, he talks about Sariputta as one of them. And then there's another student who you guys are going to see when we get to that discourse, that he talks about these two students that are his close students. So Sariputta is one of those. So he's asking Sariputta, he says, this is said, a stream enterer, a stream enterer. What now, Sariputta, is a stream enterer? So Sariputta says, okay, a stream enterer is going to have learned and practiced, essentially is what he's saying, the Eightfold Path. Right? And then the Buddha says, yes, that's right. That's accurate. Right? So in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to need to learn and practice the Eightfold Path very well, dialing that in very, very closely. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions. So now we'll go to chapter 5. Is there someone who would like to read this? Looks like Vibhav. Go ahead, sir.
So I had a question as well on the practicing the Eightfold Path, and when you get to it, when they get to us being a stream enterer. I think I've asked this question before, but like, is as a stream enterer, are you practicing to perfection, or there's something that you're not practicing that, and you're still in the Eightfold Path, and you still can become a stream enterer?
Your moral conduct is perfected by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment in terms of right speech, right action, and right livelihood, as it's described in the Eightfold Path. You still have certain moral conduct that you need to improve, but in terms of like that top level where it talks about eliminating lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech, you would have eliminated that. There's still work to do with the speech, but you have eliminated those 4. And then the same thing with right action. You would have eliminated killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, but there's some other moral conduct that you need to improve. And then with your livelihood, you would have gotten to the first fold of purification, but there's still work to do in order to get to the second fold. So that moral conduct section that is described in the Eightfold Path is perfected, but there's still work to do on the moral conduct. It's just a deeper level teaching that isn't part of the top line of the Eightfold Path. It's more of the teachings that integrate and plug into the Eightfold Path. So in terms of complete perfection, it's only an enlightened being who is practicing to complete perfection.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Were you planning to read this, Vibhav, or should I see if there's someone else who would like to read?
I can read it if nobody else.
Okay. Is there someone else who would like to read this one? Okay, it looks like everyone's giving it to you, Vibhav.
Thank you. Eliminating the 5 dangers and hostiles as a stream mentor. Householder. When a noble disciple has eliminated 5 dangers and hostiles, possesses the 4 factors of stream entry, and has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom the noble method, he might, if he so aspires, declare of himself, I am one finished with hell, the animal realm, and the realm of afflicted spirits, finished with the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. I am a stream enterer, no longer subject to rebirth in the lower world, fixed in destination, heading for enlightenment. What are the 5 dangers and hostiles that have been eliminated? Householder, one who destroys life, the destruction of life its condition, creates danger and hostility pertaining to the present life and danger, and hostility pertaining to future lives. And he also experiences mental pain and sadness. One who abstains from destruction of life does not create such danger and hostility pertaining to the present life, or such danger and hostility pertaining to future lives, nor does he experience pain and sadness. For one who abstains from the destruction of life, that danger and hostility has thus been eliminated. One who takes what is not given, with taking what is not given as condition, creates danger and hostility pertaining to the present life, and danger and hostility pertaining to future lives. And he also experiences mental pain and sadness. One who abstains from taking what is not given does not create such danger and hostility pertaining to the present life, or such danger and hostility pertaining to future lives, nor does he experience mental pain and sadness. But one who abstains from taking what is not given, that danger and hostility has thus been eliminated. One who engages in sexual misconduct, with sexual misconduct as condition, creates danger and hostility pertaining to the present life, and danger and hostility pertaining to future lives. And he also experiences mental pain and sadness. One who abstains from sexual misconduct does not create such danger and hostility pertaining to the present life, or such danger and hostility pertaining to future lives, nor does he experience mental pain and sadness. For one who abstains from sexual misconduct, that danger and hostility has thus been eliminated. One who speaks falsely with false speech as condition creates danger and hostility pertaining to the present life, and danger and hostility pertaining to future lives. And he also experiences mental pain and sadness. One who abstains from false speech does not create such danger and hostility pertaining to the present life, or such danger and hostility pertaining to future lives, nor does he experience mental pain and sadness. For one who abstains from false speech, that danger and hostility has thus been eliminated. One who indulges in liquor, wine, and substances that cause unawareness of mind, the basis for heedlessness, with indulgence in liquor, wine, and substances that cause unawareness of mind as condition, creates danger and hostility pertaining to the present life, and danger and hostility pertaining to future lives. And he also experiences mental pain and sadness. One who abstains from liquor, wine, and substances that cause unawareness of mind, the basis of heedlessness, does not create such danger and hostility pertaining to the present life, or such danger and hostility pertaining to future lives, nor does he experience mental pain and sadness. For one who abstains from liquor, wine, and substances that cause unawareness of mind, the basis for heedlessness, that danger and hostility has thus been eliminated. These are the 5 dangers and hostiles that have been eliminated. And what are the 4 factors of stream entry that he possesses? Here, householder, a noble disciple possesses unwavering confidence in the Buddha thus. The perfectly enlightened one is an arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true wisdom and conduct, fortunate, knower of the worlds, unsurpassed trainer of persons to be tamed, teacher of heavenly beings and humans, the enlightened one, the fortunate one. 2. He possesses unwavering confidence in the teachings thus. The teachings are well expounded by the perfectly enlightened one, directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise. He possesses unwavering confidence in the community thus. The community of the perfectly enlightened one's disciples is practicing the wholesome way, practicing the straight way, practicing the true way, practicing the proper way. That is, the four pairs of persons, the eight types of individuals. This community of the perfectly enlightened one's disciples is worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of respectful salutation, the unsurpassed feat of merit for the world. He possesses the virtuous behavior, practicing moral conduct, admired by the noble ones, unbroken, untorn, unblemished, unblotched, liberating, praised by the wise, not misunderstood, and leading to concentration. These are the four factors of stream entry that he possesses. And what is the noble method that he has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom? Here, householder, the noble disciple reflects us. When this exists, that comes to be. With the rising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the elimination of this, that is eliminated. That is, with ignorance as condition, volitional formations, choices, decisions come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness. With consciousness as condition, name and form. With name and form as condition, the sixth sense basis. With the sixth sense basis as condition, contact. With contact as condition, feeling. With feeling as condition, craving. With craving as condition, clinging. With clinging as condition, existence. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, old age and death, sorrow, grief, pain, sadness, and misery come to be. Such is the cause of the whole mass of discontentedness. But with the remainderness fading away and elimination of ignorance comes elimination of volitional formations. With the elimination of volitional formations, elimination of consciousness. With the elimination of consciousness, elimination of name and form. With the elimination of name and form, elimination of the six sense basis. With the elimination of the six sense basis, elimination of contact. With the elimination of contact, elimination of feeling. With the elimination of feeling, elimination of craving. With the elimination of craving, elimination of clinging. With the elimination of clinging, elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence, elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth, old age and death, sorrow, grief, pain, sadness, and misery is eliminated. Such is the elimination of this whole mass of discontentedness. This is a noble method that has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom. Householder, when a noble disciple has eliminated these five dangers and hostiles, and he possesses these four factors of stream entry, and he has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom the noble method, he might, he so aspires, declare of himself, I am unfinished with hell, the animal realm, and the realm of afflicted spirits, finished with the plane of misery, with the bad destination, the lower world. I am a stream enterer, no longer subject to rebirth in the lower world, fixed in destination, heading for enlightenment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vibhav. So here we get some more information about what it takes to be able to get to this first stage of enlightenment. So the Buddha is slowly uncovering in these different layers of understanding that you need to know in order to be able to train your mind to get to this first stage of enlightenment. So here he's saying that an individual has eliminated the five dangers and hostiles, that they possess the four factors of stream entry, which you've studied previously, and they've clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom the noble method. Okay, so these are three things. The first one, which is the five dangers and hostiles, these are the five precepts that an individual who's gotten to the first stage of enlightenment, they would be practicing these five precepts. This is helpful for you to be able to go back and look at what the Buddha taught on the five precepts. You'll see this in Volume 1, Chapter 7. Not only do I have the original words of the Buddha there for the five precepts, but it also shows you how to relate it to day-to-day activities. And if you've learned in those classes with me, you've seen how I teach that. So an individual who's gotten to the first stage of enlightenment would be practicing the five precepts to perfection. This is part of what is helping you to improve your moral conduct. But more clearly, what this is helping you to do is see the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result. That there's a certain amount of wisdom that you've cultivated about this natural law, and you understand what this natural law is as it relates to these five areas, and that you've been able to now navigate that and practice that for an extended period of time. So you can see that here in the words of the Buddha, because I've had people tell me that as a person in the first stage of enlightenment, they're still going to be using drugs and alcohol. And this isn't true. You can see it here in the words of the Buddha. right? You can see very clearly that he talks about this. An individual who's in the first stage of enlightenment absolutely would not be using drugs and alcohol, right? So they would be practicing the 5 precepts closely. Then the 4 factors of stream entry, which we've been studying already, which is confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, and the community. That's the triple gem or the triple jewel. And they would have improved moral conduct, that they would have certain virtuous behavior from the Eightfold Path. That you'll see this in other teachings and other discourses where the Buddha calls it out specifically. But here he's just talking about it more generally, just virtuous behavior that is dear to the noble ones or admired by the noble ones. But I can share with you, it's right speech, right action, and right livelihood from the Eightfold Path. But you'll be able to see that for yourself as you study more deeply in the teachings of the Buddha. But now we're seeing another layer, that there's this noble method that an individual who's gotten to the first stage of enlightenment would have clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom. And what is that noble method? Well, this is dependent origination. This is what I'm going to teach you next week in chapter 14. If you haven't read that already, I suggest you read it a few times before class. And yeah, I mean a few times. And then you're going to need to learn it in class. And then you're going to need to learn it a few times outside of class too. I've had some students take upwards of a year to understand dependent origination. So when you first start on the path, you learn things like the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths. You're learning these things like impermanence. You kind of get that in about 3 to 5 minutes. Discontentedness, same thing, about 5 minutes, you get it. The universal truth of non-self, you need to work on that a little bit. But ultimately, the 4 noble truths, you can kind of get it in one discourse, right? Dependent origination isn't that type of teaching. This is the highest, most ultimate truth of the Buddha, where he's teaching you the 12 interlinking steps that leads to rebirth in the cycle of rebirth and discontentedness. So the 4 noble truths gives you like a window into what's going on in the unenlightened mind, and it penetrates into craving, desire, attachment, helping you to see that that's what's causing discontentedness. But then when you go deeper and deeper into this, you ultimately get to dependent origination, where there's these 12 interlinking steps, starting with ignorance and ending with discontentedness. So you can see that there's this lack of wisdom that ultimately leads to the last part, which is discontentedness. You've learned this potentially as part of the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots or the 3 fires, where I taught craving, anger, and ignorance. And I explained that it's really because of ignorance that craving and anger continues in the mind. So that's ultimately what you're going to learn as part of dependent origination, that it's all because of ignorance, this lack of wisdom, this unknowing of true reality, that the mind will continue to crave and cling. And because of this craving and clinging, the mind experiences sorrow, grief, pain, sadness, and misery. This is all that comes to be. This is where this whole mass of discontentedness comes from. But here the Buddha is giving you these interlinking steps to be able to see this chain of events that is occurring. Because what you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're dismantling this. You're destroying this. You're eliminating ignorance. That's why your ultimate goal on the path is to cultivate wisdom. You're not interested in believing any of the teachings, because with belief, you don't know what's true or false. You're just believing it. But you need to get to the point of independent verification. That's what's going to lead you to the cultivation of wisdom, which is now going to help you to dismantle all of dependent origination. So someone who's gotten to the first stage of enlightenment, they will understand dependent origination. They would have even committed it to their memory that they know the interlinking steps. You're going to see this as part of this book, where the Buddha says that you've been able to acquire what's called wisdom of principle and wisdom of entailment. What wisdom of principle is that you'll know what each individual one of these are, like ignorance, volitional formations, the consciousness, the name and form, the 6 sense bases, and so forth and so on. Wisdom of principle is to know what each one of those things are, right? And then wisdom of entailment is to notice how one leads to the other, that leads to the other, that leads to the other, the kind of domino effect. So we're going to talk about this more in future classes as part of this book. But here, this is just kind of like a little bit of an overview for you and kind of prepping you to be able to read Volume 5, Chapter 14, if you haven't already, and to study that next week, because that's what we're going to be studying. So an individual who's gotten to the first stage of enlightenment will have penetrated into dependent origination. So the Buddha sums all this up with starting off where he started, right? Or finishing off where he started. This is a way that the Buddha teaches, is he'll tell you what he's going to tell you. He will tell it to you, and then he will tell you what he told you, right? This is what people are saying today is like a wonderful way to teach. If you go to like a business communication class or like a teaching class or a presentation, like public speaking, they will teach you to actually speak this way. I don't know that those people understand that it came from the Buddha, that this is the way the Buddha would teach, but this is the way you get people to remember what it is that you're saying, is you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell it to them, and then you tell them what you told them. And that's what the Buddha is doing here, is he's telling you what he told you and what he taught you. And he's taught you how to eliminate these 5 dangers and hostiles. He taught you what those are and that they need to be eliminated. He taught you that there's this possession of the 4 factors of stream entry, and then that this person has penetrated into this noble method, which is dependent origination. And because of that, the individual has gotten to the point where they're now a stream enterer, no longer being able to be reborn into the lower realms with enlightenment as their destination. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I don't see any. Oh, I see one there. There's Kristen. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, teacher. Every time I read this or see this, and my mind always gets a little tripped up with consciousness and volitional formation. And so I just want to know if I'm seeing it clearly, where consciousness is sort of thoughts and ideas, volitional formations are just choices and decisions. Is that right?
Very close. Volitional formations are the choices and decisions. Definitely. That's why I put that in there for you guys. The consciousness is the mind itself. So it's not necessarily the thoughts and ideas in the mind. It's the mind itself that, because of ignorance, then an individual is going to make decisions that lead to the creation of a consciousness or a mind, kind of like the cardboard box analogy.
Okay.
So the consciousness is the cardboard box. The contents in the cardboard box, that's the thoughts and the ideas and the things like that.
Okay. Understood. Okay. Thank you, teacher.
Yeah. And one other way that you can remember this is, in order for there to be a living being, some of the criteria is that you need a consciousness, which is the mind, and you need this name and form, which is the physical body. So this is the mind coming into the physical body, because that's what name and form is.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So we'll move to this chapter 6. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Kristen, I see your hand still up. Would you like to read?
Sure. I'll read.
Okay.
Okay. Chapter 6. A stream enterer understands the 5 aggregates. When monks, a noble disciple understands as they really are the cause and the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these 5 aggregates subject to clinging. Monks, then he is called a noble disciple who is a stream enterer, no longer bound to the netherworld, fixed in destination, with enlightenment as his destination. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. So here we see yet again another layer that the Buddha is talking about of an individual who's in the first stage of enlightenment. A stream enterer is going to understand the 5 aggregates. And this is something that I've actually taught in a previous class all the way back in volume 2, chapter 7, I think it was, that I taught that. There's other times that I've kind of introduced them and kind of mentioned them here and there. If you haven't studied this yet, we can talk about it here a bit and make sure that you understand what the 5 aggregates are, because in order to get into that first stage, you're going to need to understand these five aggregates. And as the Buddha shares, that you're going to need to know the cause, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in regards to these five aggregates. So the five aggregates are form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. These are the five things that make a living being a living being. Every single living being will have these five aggregates. And remember, you can't believe this, right? So you need to independently verify it. The word five aggregates is being used here, but one of the ways you can think about that is five criteria or five elements. These are the five criteria that determine what is a living being. A living being is going to have physical form. And since you're a living being and you know that you're a living being, you can verify that, yes, you have physical form, right? Then a living being is going to have feelings. This is the pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant, that this is what a living being is going to experience. Then there's going to be perceptions. These are your views and opinions, your beliefs about how things may seem to be in the world. It's not necessarily true. It's more of like an assumption that the mind doesn't really truly know the truth necessarily. It's just a perception. It's your views and opinions, and in some cases, an assumption. Then a living being is going to have volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. And there's going to be a consciousness or a mind. So you can see that you have all of these. You have physical form, you have feelings, you have perceptions. You start talking about politics with somebody and they'll tell you what their views and opinions are, right? That's what a perception is, a view or opinion that may or may not be true. Volitional formations are those choices and decisions, essentially free will. All living beings have free will to make whatever choices that they like. And then there's the consciousness or the mind. Right? So these are the five criteria that makes a living being a living being. So what a living being will typically be doing in the unenlightened state is they will be clinging to these things, right? You'll be clinging to the physical form of the body, wanting it to be permanent. You'll be clinging to the feelings, clinging to your views and opinions. That's why people argue so much about politics and things like that. And then you might cling to your volitional formations or your choices and decisions. And then you might cling to the consciousness, which is the self-identity that's in the mind. So an individual needs to learn how to eliminate this. So when the Buddha talks about the cause, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape, he's talking about, well, what's the cause of these five aggregates? Why do these five aggregates keep being taken up over and over and over and over again in each individual life? Well, it's craving, desire, attachment. That's what's actually causing the mind to continuing to experience these five aggregates being taken up. What's the disappearance of these five aggregates? Well, that's understood through the universal truth of impermanence. Well, what's the gratification? This is the unenlightened mind's central desire, where it's longing, yearning for those pleasant feelings. Well, what's the danger in that? Well, the danger is that you're going to experience discontentedness and the mind's going to be all shaken up. And now you can't make wise decisions that's going to produce wholesome results for you. Well, what's the escape from all of that? Well, it's the Eightfold Path. When you learn and practice that, that's what's going to guide you to the complete dismantling of this cause, where this is going to take away the cause that's producing continued existence over and over and over and over and over again. So the Eightfold Path is what's going to help you to be able to dismantle the dependent origination and the causes and conditions that are producing continued rebirth. So you're going to need to know and understand the cause, the disappearance, gratification, danger, and escape. And some of these things you might have already studied, but here the Buddha is helping you to be able to understand that you need to understand those in relationship to the five aggregates. And this is what an individual would have studied on their way to getting to that first stage of enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here on chapter 6, where the Buddha is helping you to see that the five aggregates are something that someone in the first stage of enlightenment will have understood. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. Kim, I saw you had your hand up there for a second, but I think you've put it back down. So if you have a question, just let me know. Okay, we'll move on to chapter 7. Would somebody like to read this one? Okay, we've got two people. I guess we'll go with Vibhav or maybe Kristen, since Kristen has only read once. Oops, sorry, Kristen, I muted you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, chapter 7. A stream enterer understands the six sense bases. Monks, there are these six sense bases. What six? The eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. When monks, a noble disciple understands, as they really are, the gratification, the danger, the escape, in the case of these six sense bases, then he is called a noble disciple, one who is a stream enterer, no longer bound to the netherworld, fixed in destination, with Nibbana, enlightenment, as its destination.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here, this is where the Buddha is helping you to see that not only would a stream enterer understand the five aggregates, but they would understand the six sense bases as well. The six sense bases is something that we're going to study as part of volume 9. So if you don't understand this right now, it's okay, but you'll be able to gather this over the program, right? So just because you're learning this doesn't mean that you need to know it right now, right? This is just the Buddha making you aware that someone in the first stage of enlightenment will have understood this. So this is something that you work on. And if it's something that you don't understand right now, then you spend time to make sure you understand it in the future. And today too, of course. So the six sense bases are the doorways that you're going to experience in the mind contact, that you're going to experience contact through the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. And this is how you're going to experience discontentedness, that it's going to trigger one of your cravings, desires, attachments, your sensual desire, because it's your sense bases that's taking in contact. And now your mind is seeing that as either agreeable or disagreeable. And now what you need to be able to do is make sure you understand what these six sense bases are. And that's something that you can see here, that they're the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and understand how you experience contact through these. We've already studied these a little bit in some of the other volumes, but we're going to get deeper into it in volume 9. So these are what's referred to as the internal sense bases. Then there's something called the external sense bases. The external sense bases are whatever the internal sense base actually has contact with. So the eye has contact with physical form. The ear has contact with sounds. The nose has contact with odors. The tongue has contact with flavors. The body has contact with physical objects. The mind has contact with mental objects. And now again, the mind's going to see this contact as either agreeable or disagreeable. I've given you different examples of this. So for example, like the car analogy, right? That car pulls up to you. It's got your favorite music on. You're like, whoa, that's my jam. All right, let's party, party, party. Because you're hearing a sound that's going through the ear that the mind sees as agreeable. But when you pull up to the very next light and somebody else has music on that you don't particularly care for, that sound entering your ear, the mind sees it as disagreeable. And now your mind will experience frustration or annoyment or agitation. But it's not coming from the music. It's not coming from the person playing the music. It's coming from the sensual desire inside the mind. And it just so happens that the ear is the sense base that is experiencing the contact, that through this ear, the mind is experiencing contact. So you would understand the six sense bases prior to getting to the first stage of enlightenment. Because remember, that first stage of enlightenment, you've already gathered up all the things that you need to be able to make your way to enlightenment itself. So in order to get to enlightenment itself, you would need to eliminate sensual desire, where your mind is no longer seeing things as agreeable and disagreeable. In order to be able to do that, you would need to know what the six sense bases are. You would never be able to eliminate sensual desire if you didn't know what they are. So that's why the Buddha is showing you all the things that the stream enterer has kind of collected up as part of getting to that first stage of enlightenment. And then here he's talking about the gratification, the danger, and the escape in relationship to the six sense bases. So here it's the same as the previous chapter. So I didn't include that here. So the gratification is that the mind is longing, yearning through the sense spaces with this central desire. That's the gratification, that the mind's longing, yearning through this central desire. The danger is that you're going to experience discontentedness if you allow the mind to keep doing that. You're going to get either conditioned pleasant feelings, painful feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant feelings. And then the escape is the Eightfold Path. That's the escape. So you would understand not only these 6 sense bases, but the gratification, the danger, and the escape, so that way you can actually make your way to the elimination of central desire. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I don't see any questions. So here we've got chapter 8. Would somebody like to read this one? Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir. You're getting the long ones today, Vibhav.
2 kinds of stream mentoring. Confident practitioner. Monks, the eye is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The ear is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The nose is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The tongue is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The body is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The mind is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. One who places confidence in his teachings and persistent in them is called a confident practitioner. One who has entered the fixed course of rightness, entered the plane of wholesome persons, transcended the plane of the worldlings. He is incapable of doing any deed by reason of which he might be reborn in hell, in the animal realm, in the realm of afflicted spirits. He is incapable of passing away without having realized the fruit of stream entry. A teachings practitioner, one for whom these teachings are understood thus after being pondered to a sufficient degree with wisdom, is called a teachings practitioner. One who has entered the fixed course of rightness, entered the plane of wholesome persons, transcended the plane of the worldlings. He is incapable of doing any deed by reason of which he might be reborn in hell, in the animal realm, or in the realm of afflicted spirits. He is incapable of passing away without having realized the fruit of stream entry. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vibhav. So we talked about these in a previous volume where I was explaining to you how during the lifetime of the Buddha, getting into the first stage of enlightenment, he kind of classified this as a confidence practitioner and a teachings practitioner. There's not a whole lot of detail on this, and we don't actually really need to know this in this particular life. Remember that what we have in the Pali Canon is the largest, most complete collection we have of the teachings of the Buddha, but it's not everything that he actually taught. So there's definitely some things that we're missing here, but fortunately, we actually don't need to know this in order to be able to get to enlightenment, but it is something that you'll actually see that the Buddha kind of segments it in this way. So I don't really have a whole lot of detail on this. Instead, I'm focusing you on to understand how to get to this first stage of enlightenment through all the teachings that I share is to be able to help you get to enlightenment itself. But in terms of getting to the first stage of enlightenment, that's what we're talking about as part of this book. But during the lifetime of the Buddha, he separated it into confidence practitioner and a teachings practitioner. But we don't 100% know what that means. And it doesn't necessarily need to be learned and understood in order to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment or enlightenment itself. But it's here so that you can see that the Buddha separated it in this way. So let me know if you guys have questions here. Okay, I don't see any questions. So we'll go to chapter 9. This is chapter 9. Would someone like to read this one? Okay, Samantha.
Fruit of stream entry. One who knows and sees these teachings as described in 2 kinds of stream entering, thus is called a stream enterer, no longer bound to the netherworld, fixed in destiny, with enlightenment as their destination. Sariputta, this noble eightfold path is the stream, that is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So again, the Buddha is emphasizing the Eightfold Path as part of getting to the first stage of enlightenment. and he's talking to Sariputta here, which is one of his close students. So we can know that it's the Eightfold Path that's going to help you to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. We know this for sure. So that's why I encourage people early on in their development to really focus on the Eightfold Path, because that's what's going to get you to base camp, so to speak. Okay, so any questions on this one here? Okay, I don't see any questions. So we'll go to the last chapter for today. This is chapter 10. I was going to say it looks maybe longer. You couldn't read that last one, Vibha. That was too short for you. Okay, looks like Samantha. Go ahead, ma'am.
The stream enterer fulfills virtuous behavior, but cultivates concentration and wisdom only to a moderate extent. Monks, every half month, more than 150 training guidelines come up for recitation. Clansmen who aspire for their own good train in these. These are all comprised within these three trainings. What three? The training in the higher virtuous behavior or moral conduct, training in the higher mind, mental discipline, and the training in the higher wisdom. These are the three trainings in which all this is comprised. Here a monk fulfills virtuous behavior, but cultivates concentration and wisdom only to a moderate extent. He falls into wrongdoing in regard to the lesser and minor training guidelines and rehabilitates himself. For what reason? Because I have not said that he is incapable of this, but in regard to those training guidelines that are fundamental to the spiritual life and practicing with the spiritual life, his behavior is constant and steadfast. Having undertaken the training guidelines, he trains in them. With the complete destruction of three fetters, he is a stream enterer, no longer subject to rebirth in the lower world, fixed in destiny, with enlightenment as his destination.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. So here we get more details of what a stream enterer has done and what they've accomplished in order to be able to get into that first stage of enlightenment. So first, the Buddha opens this up with saying every half a month, this is where an individual come together, his students would recite his teachings, the 150 training guidelines. This is how chanting came about. So you can see, as I've shared with you guys, that chanting was used as a way to commit the teachings to memory. It's not a rite, ritual, ceremony, worship, or prayer, or anything like that. And these are the 150 training guidelines that were existing during the lifetime of the Buddha. Oftentimes people think that the Buddha taught a lot more than that, because ordained practitioners today who are male, they tend to practice 227 precepts, and the females practice 311. But the Buddha never actually created those. He only created 150. So the things that you'll see in the 227 and the 311, those were created after the death of the Buddha. And the Buddha teaches that it's unwise to change his teachings, but some people did change his teachings along the way. So here you can see this first part of how many precepts the Buddha actually taught for ordained practitioners, which is 150. And you can see that the chanting was used as a way to commit the teachings to memory. And what these teachings are based on are the Eightfold Path. That's what the higher virtuous behavior, the higher mind, and the higher wisdom is, because the Eightfold Path is sectioned into those three sections. The wisdom section, which is right view and right intention. The moral conduct section, which is right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And then you've got the mental discipline section, which is right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So that's what the Buddha was focusing his students on, is to be able to train the mind through the Eightfold Path. So here again, we can see that a person who's in the first stage of enlightenment will have learned the Eightfold Path and practiced that closely. But you can see here that someone has maybe not practiced the Eightfold Path close enough, right? And now when they've fallen into minor wrongdoings, what the Buddha is talking about here essentially, that this individual can rehabilitate themselves, meaning they can see the errors of their ways and then they can improve upon that. Right? The major things, they're practicing those, but as a person in the first stage of enlightenment, there's kind of some minor things that an individual would be not practicing. So for example, let's take something simple for moral conduct. the right speech is eliminating lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. Someone who's in the first stage of enlightenment won't be doing any of those. Those are the major training guidelines. But if you look at the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, which is to speak at the proper time, what you say is true, gentle, beneficial, and with a mind of loving kindness, an individual who's in the first stage of enlightenment, they still have ill will. So they're still not going to be practicing speaking with a mind of loving kindness at all times. So that's one of the minor or lesser training that the Buddha is teaching you. It's very important to be able to get to enlightenment, but it's not one of those top line things. Or maybe we can talk about speaking at the proper time, right? That first criteria. An individual who is in the first stage of enlightenment might still not be practicing that 100%, right? But in terms of like the top line, they would be practicing that. But they would see, I was interrupting that guy. I wasn't speaking at the proper time. Or, I was a little bit too angry there. I shouldn't have been speaking. It was the improper time for me to be speaking, right? So an individual who's in that first stage of enlightenment, they would be not fully perfecting the Eightfold Path in the lesser training, but they would be able to see their faults, they would be able to see their missteps, and then they would be able to improve upon that because they would have the wisdom of how to improve because they would know those teachings. And then the Buddha goes on here and he talks about how an individual who's in the first stage of enlightenment will have completely destroyed the first 3 fetters. This is what I was talking about at the beginning and a couple of times throughout our class. And you can see it here in the teachings of the Buddha. Well, you might remember the 10 fetters from the previous classes that I've taught where I explained those 10 fetters. And if you haven't, you can always learn those. But what the first 3 are, personal existence view, doubts, and wrong behavior and observances. An individual would have eliminated those in order to be able to get into the first stage of enlightenment. So based on everything that we've studied today, you can see that a stream enterer would have eliminated the first 3 fetters, personal existence view, doubt, wrong behavior, and observances. They would have understood dependent origination. They would have understood the 5 aggregates and the 6 sense bases, and they would have confirmed confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, and they would be practicing a certain level of moral conduct. So this is what we've learned in just these 10 chapters. And this is a significant amount of understanding to be able to get to that point and be practicing those things. So this is where we're going to leave off today, but there's more things that you're going to be learning as part of this particular book of what a person who's in the first stage of enlightenment will be practicing. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. So it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. Can you refresh my memory as to where you have the quizzes, Teacher David?
Sure. If you look in the first book, at the end of each chapter, there's a little box that says like learning opportunities or something like that. I forget what I labeled it, learning resources. And I would say about 20 of the chapters, they have quizzes in there. So if you go to the end of each chapter using the ebook, then you can click on the quiz, and then that'll allow you to take the quiz and see some of the jokes that I wrote in there.
So we don't have quizzes for the Pali Canon books.
Correct. There's no quizzes for those.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, can you just clarify about like you said that the moral conduct is not fully perfected. Did you say that you may like in some cases you may not speak at the proper time?
Yeah. So the moral conduct at the level of the Eightfold Path, that's what I was explaining to you, is that with the Eightfold Path, you have under right speech to eliminate lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. That's the Eightfold Path. But then you have lesser and more teachings like the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. That's not part of the Eightfold Path. It integrates into the Eightfold Path, but it's not part of the top line of the Eightfold Path. So a stream enterer won't be speaking with falsehoods. They won't be speaking with slander or gossip. They won't be speaking harshly. They won't be speaking with frivolous speech. They will have eliminated that. But they could potentially be speaking at the improper time, or they could be speaking without a mind of loving kindness because they still have ill will in their mind, for example. So the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, while I teach it, while I'm teaching the Eightfold Path, it's not part of the Eightfold Path per se.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to check to see if we have questions anywhere else. And I don't see any questions anywhere else. All right, so what I'll do then is just end by thanking all of you guys like I typically do. I suggest you take your time to walk through these chapters and really soak it in. You might need to start reading these chapters more than one time per week. If you haven't been reading them at all, I definitely suggest you move to start reading them either prior to class or after class. But if you have been reading once, you might decide to start reading them twice, maybe before class and after class, or maybe read them twice after class. Maybe read them on multiple days to really help them to soak into the mind and be able to understand them, because you're going to be seeing deeper and deeper teachings as you go in this program. And it's really important to not only read the words of the Buddha, but what I'm sharing in those discourses as well, so you can more fully see what it is that's actually being shared. Particularly now that we're getting to dependent origination, you're going to need to really take your time with that one. And don't put pressure on yourself or put an expectation on yourself that you should understand dependent origination the first time you learn it. That's not the way that this teaching typically works. I had an individual one time who had been studying with me for about 6 months or so, and he was in a retreat with me while I was teaching dependent origination. And he had been studying the Buddhist teachings in other venues for quite a while. And he was in class with me, and I was teaching dependent origination. And after I taught dependent origination, he was like, "Oh my gosh, I finally understand it." Right? He said, "I've been studying the teachings of the Buddha for 10 years. And in the 10 minutes explanation of dependent origination, I finally got it. I finally understand what this teaching is." Right? So depending on the teachers that you've had, depending on the resources that you use, depending on how much time you've kind of soaked these teachings in, this particular teaching can take a while. So don't put an expectation on yourself that it's going to be like the universal truth of impermanence and you can understand it in about 3 to 5 minutes. It's going to take you some time. Now that you're getting deeper into the teachings of the Buddha, you're going to need to really take your time with a lot of these teachings. But if you have the expectation that you should know them all right away, just like you did with the universal truth of impermanence, you're going to get frustrated. You're going to get angry and irritated. And that's the mind having craving, desire, wants, and expectations. So eliminate that and just understand you're on a journey, you're a work in progress, and it's going to take you some time to understand it. And where you need help, you can ask questions in these live classes. You can post in our Facebook group. You can send me a private message, or you can schedule personal guidance, and I'll actually sit down with you either in person or online and gradually walk you through any of the teachings that you need help with. So feel free to use all of those methods to get help. So next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters, chapters 11 through 20. You can study those before and or after class, and we'll be walking through those as part of our study group next week. Tomorrow in the group learning program, I'm going to be in chapter 17 of volume 1. This is titled Eliminating Fears. Are you really scared? This is where I'm going to help you understand how to eliminate all your fears. Because by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't have any fears, whether it's the fear of spiders, the fear of heights, the fear of snakes, or even the fear of your own death. You would have eliminated that from the mind. And there are certain teachings that you need in order to be able to eliminate that. Sure, it's the Eightfold Path, but there's other things that you can be doing as well to eliminate that. And then all next week, I'm going to be sharing the Foundation and the Path to Enlightenment course. So you guys are welcome to attend any of these programs. I'm sure you know how to get access to them and the schedules and all of that stuff. But if you need any information on that, just let me know. So have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Take care. Sawadee ka. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.